The blood-red sun hung low in the Montana sky as Rose Keller's tears mixed with the dust of the trail. At 18 years old, she never imagined her father would trade her away like cattle to settle a gambling debt. Yet here she was, bound for the sprawling Thornhill Ranch outside of Jackson, Montana Territory, 1876, where Thomas Harrington, a man of 45, awaited his bride-to-be. Rose clutched the small leather satchel containing her few belongings, her knuckles white with tension. The driver of the wagon, a weathered old man who'd barely spoken 10 words since they'd left her family's failing homestead that morning, cleared his throat. Almost there, Miss Thornhill's just beyond that ridge. Rose nodded silently, unable to form words through the knot in her throat. Her auburn hair, once neatly pinned, now fell in loose tendrils around her face, framing eyes reddened from crying. She'd begged her father not to do this, but John Keller was a desperate man with debts that could get him killed. When Thomas Harrington offered to clear those debts in exchange for Rose's hand, her father had agreed without hesitation. "You'll have a good life," he'd told her as he practically pushed her onto the wagon. "Harrington's the wealthiest rancher in 3 counties. You'll want for nothing." Except freedom, Rose thought bitterly. Except love. The wagon crested the ridge, and Rose gasped despite herself. Thornhill Ranch spread out below them hundreds of acres of prime grazing land, a large main house with several outbuildings, and more cattle than she'd ever seen in one place. In another life, she might have been impressed. Now she saw only the gilded cage where she'd spend her remaining days. "Quite a sight, ain't it?" the driver remarked. "Mr. Harrington's built himself quite the empire out here." Rose remained silent as they made their way down the sloping trail toward the ranch. As they drew closer, she could see figures moving about ranch hands tending to horses and cattle. One figure in particular caught her eye, a tall man leading a magnificent black stallion from the corral. Even from this distance, she could see he moved with confidence and grace. The wagon pulled up in front of the main house, a 2-story structure built of sturdy timber and stone. Before the driver could help her down, the front door swung open, revealing Thomas Harrington himself. He was tall and broad-shouldered, his once dark hair now streaked with gray, his face weathered from years under the Montana sun. He wasn't unattractive for a man his age, but the predatory smile he offered Rose sent chills down her spine. "Miss Keller," he called, approaching the wagon. "Welcome to Thornhill. I trust your journey wasn't too taxing." "It was fine, Mr. Harrington," Rose replied, her voice barely audible. "Please call me Thomas. After all, we're to be married in 3 days' time." Rose felt the blood drain from her face. 3 days, so soon. "Come inside," Thomas continued, extending his hand to help her down from the wagon. "Mrs. Cooper, my housekeeper, has prepared a room for you. You must be tired after your journey." As Rose reluctantly took his hand, she felt eyes on her. Glancing over her shoulder, she found herself looking directly at the man she'd noticed earlier, the one with the black stallion. He stood not 20 yards away, his intense gaze fixed on her. He was younger than Harrington, perhaps in his late 20s, with sun-bronzed skin and dark hair that curled slightly at the nape of his neck. When their eyes met, Rose felt a curious flutter in her chest. "Tucker," Thomas called sharply, "see to Miss Keller's belongings." The man Tucker nodded once and approached the wagon. As he reached for Rose's satchel, their hands briefly touched, sending an unexpected jolt through her fingers. "Madam," he said simply, his voice deep and smooth as river stones. "Thank you," Rose whispered. Thomas's grip on her arm tightened slightly as he guided her toward the house. "Tucker Hayes is my foreman," he explained. "Been with me 5 years now, best horseman in the territory, but knows his place." Rose detected a note of warning in his voice, though she couldn't fathom why. What threat could a ranch hand pose to a man like Thomas Harrington inside? The ranch house was surprisingly elegant for frontier living. Polished wooden floors, actual wallpaper imported from back east, and furniture that spoke of wealth and taste. A stout woman with graying hair pulled into a tight bun emerged from what Rose presumed was the kitchen. "Mrs. Cooper, this is Miss Keller, my betrothed," Thomas announced. The housekeeper's eyes widened slightly as she took in Rose's youth, but she recovered quickly. "Welcome, Miss Keller." I've prepared the blue room for you. Would you like to rest before supper? Yes, please, Rose replied, grateful for any excuse to escape Thomas's presence. I have business to attend to in town, Thomas told her. I'll return for supper. In the meantime, make yourself at home, Mrs. Cooper will see to your needs. Rose nodded, relief washing over her at his impending absence. Mrs. Cooper led her upstairs to a surprisingly lovely bedroom decorated in shades of blue and cream. A copper bathtub stood behind a screen in the corner. Would you like a bath drawn? The older woman asked kindly. That would be wonderful, thank you, Rose replied. As Mrs. Cooper busied herself with the bath, Rose moved to the window. From this vantage point, she could see much of the ranch, including the stables where Tucker Hayes was now unsaddling the black stallion. As though sensing her gaze, he looked up at her window. Even from this distance, the connection between them was undeniable. Rose quickly stepped back from the window, her heart racing. What was wrong with her? She was to be married in 3 days to the master of this ranch. Whatever strange feelings Tucker Hayes stirred in her were dangerous and futile. Your bath is ready, miss, Mrs. Cooper announced. Thank you, Rose said, turning away from the window and the troubling thoughts it had inspired. Later, refreshed from her bath and dressed in one of her few decent dresses, Rose made her way downstairs. Thomas had not yet returned, so she decided to explore her new home. The house was larger than it appeared, with a formal dining room, parlor, study, and kitchen on the first floor. French doors in the parlor opened onto a covered porch that wrapped around the side of the house. Rose stepped outside, breathing in the crisp Montana air. The sun was setting, painting the sky in brilliant hues of orange and purple. From this vantage point, she could see the bunkhouse where the ranch hands likely stayed, the stables, and several corrals. In one of these, Tucker Hayes was working with a young horse, guiding it around in a circle at the end of a long lead rope. His movements were fluid and confident, and the horse, despite its youth, seemed to trust him implicitly. He has a way with horses like I've never seen, came a voice behind her. Rose started, turning to find Mrs. Cooper standing in the doorway. I didn't mean to frighten you, the housekeeper apologized. I came to tell you Mr. Harrington has returned and supper will be served shortly. Thank you, Rose replied, casting one last glance at Tucker before following Mrs. Cooper inside. Supper was an uncomfortable affair. Thomas dominated the conversation, speaking at length about his business dealings, the success of his ranch, and his plans for expansion. Rose picked at her food, answering his occasional questions with as few words as possible. Tomorrow, Thomas announced as Mrs. Cooper cleared the dessert plates. I'll show you around the property. You should know what you're becoming mistress of. That sounds informative, Rose managed. Thomas chuckled. You're shy now, but you'll warm up. All women do eventually. The way his eyes raked over her made Rose want to shrink into herself. I've arranged for the minister to come on Sunday. Nothing elaborate, just a simple ceremony here at the ranch. So soon. Rose couldn't keep the distress from her voice. Thomas's expression hardened slightly. Is there a reason to wait? Your father and I have already settled our agreement. The reminder that she had been sold essentially purchased to satisfy her father's debts made Rose's stomach churn. No, she whispered. No reason. Thomas nodded, satisfied. Good, now you must be tired. Why don't you retire for the evening? We have a busy day tomorrow. Grateful for the dismissal, Rose excused herself and fled to her room. Once there, she finally allowed herself to break down, sobbing into her pillow to muffle the sound. How had her life come to this? Sold by her own father to a man old enough to be her father, expected to be a dutiful wife in exchange for clearing a gambling debt. Through her tears, she glanced toward the window. Night had fallen, but the moon was bright enough to illuminate the ranch yard below. A solitary figure crossed from the stables toward the bunkhouse Tucker Hayes. She was certain. Something about his confident stride stirred that strange feeling in her chest again. Rose wiped her tears away, a new resolve forming in her heart. She may have been brought to Thornhill Ranch against her will, but she would not simply accept her fate without a fight. Somehow, someway, she would escape this arrangement before Sunday. Morning came too quickly. Rose had barely slept, her mind racing with half-formed escape plans, none of which seemed feasible. She dressed in her simplest skirt and blouse, then made her way downstairs. Thomas was already at the breakfast table, reading a newspaper while Mrs. Cooper served coffee. "Ah, there you are," Thomas said, folding his paper. "I trust you slept well." "Yes, thank you," Rose lied, accepting the coffee Mrs. Cooper offered. "Good, we have much to see today." After a breakfast Rose barely tasted, Thomas escorted her outside where a buggy waited, already hitched to a handsome bay gelding. As he helped her up, Rose noticed Tucker leading several horses from the stable, presumably for the day's work. Their eyes met briefly before Thomas claimed her attention. "We'll start with the north pasture," he announced, climbing up beside her and taking the reins. "That's where I keep my prize breeding stock." As they set off, Rose couldn't help glancing back at Tucker, who stood watching them leave, his expression unreadable. The morning was spent touring the vast property. Thomas spoke constantly, pointing out boundary lines, water sources, and the various improvements he'd made over the years. Rose tried to pay attention, but her mind kept wandering to escape possibilities. Could she somehow make it to town? Was there anyone there who might help her? By midday, they had reached a scenic overlook with a view of the entire valley. Thomas stopped the buggy and produced a picnic basket that Mrs. Cooper had packed. "Beautiful, isn't it?" he asked as they sat on a blanket spread over the grass. "All of this will be yours to share once we're married." Rose looked out over the landscape, admitting to herself that it was indeed beautiful. "It's very impressive," she said carefully. Thomas seemed pleased with this response. He poured her a glass of wine, which she sipped cautiously. "Tell me, Rose," he said, his tone suddenly more intimate. "What do you know of marriage?" Rose nearly choked on her wine. My mother taught me some of what's expected of a wife," she replied, her cheeks burning. Thomas chuckled, reaching out to touch her face. "You're so innocent." "That's part of why I wanted you, you know, not just to settle your father's debt." His fingers traced down her cheek to her neck. "A man in my position could have any number of willing women, but there's something special about a young bride, untouched and unspoiled." Rose shuddered, fighting the urge to pull away from his touch. "I hope I'll meet your expectations," she managed. "Oh, I'm sure you will," Thomas replied, his eyes darkening. "I can be a generous husband to a dutiful wife." His hand moved to her shoulder, then lower. "Perhaps a small preview of our wedding night," Rose jerked away, unable to hide her revulsion. "Please, I'm not ready for that." Thomas's expression darkened momentarily before he composed himself. "Of course, forgive me, I forget how delicate young ladies can be." He withdrew his hand. "We have plenty of time for such things after Sunday." The rest of the picnic passed in uncomfortable silence. As they packed up to return to the ranch, Rose knew with absolute certainty that she could not go through with this marriage. She would rather face the wilderness alone than become Thomas Harrington's wife. Back at the ranch, Thomas was called away to deal with a problem at one of the outlying pastures. "Rest this afternoon," he told Rose. "We'll have supper together, and tomorrow you can help Mrs. Cooper prepare for the wedding." Rose nodded, relieved at his departure. Instead of going inside, however, she found herself drawn toward the stables. She told herself she merely wanted to see the horses, but in her heart, she knew she was hoping to encounter a certain foreman. The stable was cool and dim after the brightness of the afternoon sun. Rose paused just inside, allowing her eyes to adjust. The sweet smell of hay mingled with the earthier scents of horses and leather. A soft nickering came from one of the stalls. "Can I help you, Miss Keller?" Rose started at the voice, turning to find Tucker Hayes emerging from a tack room, a saddle balanced on his hip. I just wanted to see the horses," she explained, embarrassed at being caught. Tucker nodded, placing the saddle on a rack. "Mr. Harrington has some fine stock. That bay he drove today is one of our gentler animals. Would you like to meet some of the others?" "Yes, please," Rose replied, grateful for his matter-of-fact tone. Tucker led her down the row of stalls, introducing her to each horse, the workhorses, the cutting horses trained for working cattle, and finally, to the magnificent black stallion she'd seen him with the day before. "This is Midnight," Tucker said, a note of pride in his voice. "Raised him from a colt, best horse I've ever known." The stallion pushed his nose toward Rose, and she carefully reached out to stroke his velvet muzzle. He's beautiful, she murmured. He likes you, Tucker observed, something warm in his voice that made Rose look up at him. Their eyes met, and that now familiar flutter returned to her chest. Most ladies are afraid of him. I've always loved horses, Rose admitted. My family had a farm before things went badly. Tucker's expression softened. I heard about your circumstances, he said quietly. The ranch hands talk, I'm sorry. Rose blinked back sudden tears. It's not your fault, still. Tucker hesitated, then asked, Is this marriage what you want, Miss Keller? The direct question, asked with such gentle concern, broke something in Rose. No, she whispered, a tear escaping despite her efforts. But I have no choice, my father's debt. Tucker's jaw tightened. There's always a choice. Not for me, Rose replied bitterly. I have nowhere to go, no money, no family who would take me in. My father made that quite clear. Tucker stepped closer, close enough that Rose could see the flecks of gold in his brown eyes. What if you did have somewhere to go? Rose's heart skipped. What do you mean? Before Tucker could respond, a voice called from outside the stable. Miss Rose, are you out here? It was Mrs. Cooper. Rose quickly stepped back from Tucker, wiping away her tears. I'm in here, Mrs. Cooper, she called. The housekeeper appeared in the stable doorway. There you are. I've been looking everywhere. Mr. Harrington sent word that he'll be delayed until supper. He asked that I help you select fabrics for new dresses he's ordered for you. Rose nodded, glancing back at Tucker, who had adopted a carefully neutral expression. Thank you for showing me the horses, Mr. Hayes. My pleasure, Miss Keller, he replied formally. But as she turned to leave, he added softly, so only she could hear, Think about what I said. Rose followed Mrs. Cooper back to the house, her mind whirling with possibilities. What had Tucker meant? Was he offering to help her escape, and if he was, could she trust him? That evening, Thomas returned in a foul mood. One of his prize bulls had broken through a fence and injured itself. He barely spoke during supper, and when he did, it was to bark orders at Mrs. Cooper or complain about the incompetence of his ranch hands. Except Hayes, he grudgingly admitted. Man's worth his weight in gold when it comes to the stock. He glanced at Rose. You do well to stay clear of him, though. Rose froze, her fork halfway to her mouth. I'm sorry, Thomas's eyes narrowed. Mrs. Cooper mentioned she found you in the stables with him this afternoon. He was just showing me the horses, Rose explained, trying to keep her voice steady. Thomas didn't seem entirely convinced. Well, it's best you focus on your duties as mistress of the house. The stables are no place for a lady. Of course, Rose agreed, silently seething at being told where she could and couldn't go on what was supposedly to be her home. After a tense supper, Thomas announced he had paperwork to attend to and retreated to his study. Rose escaped to her room, her mind made up. Whatever Tucker had been suggesting in the stables, she would find out. Any alternative was better than marrying Thomas Harrington. The house quieted as night fell. Rose waited until she was certain both Thomas and Mrs. Cooper had retired before she acted. Changing from her nightgown into her dress, she slipped out of her room and down the back stairs that led to the kitchen. From there, she could exit through the back door without passing Thomas's study. The night air was cool as she stepped outside. The moon was nearly full, illuminating the yard enough for her to make her way to the bunkhouse without a lantern. Her heart pounded so loudly she was certain it would wake the entire ranch. The bunkhouse was dark except for a single window where a faint light glowed. Rose hesitated, suddenly uncertain. What if she'd misunderstood Tucker's meaning? What if he reported her to Thomas? Before she could lose her nerve, the bunkhouse door opened and Tucker stepped out. He didn't seem surprised to see her. I hoped you'd come, he said softly, glancing toward the main house. But we shouldn't talk here. Follow me. He led her to the stables, where they would be hidden from view of both the main house and the bunkhouse. Once inside, he lit a small lantern, keeping the flame low. What did you mean earlier? Rose asked without preamble. About having a choice. Tucker studied her face in the dim light. I meant that no one should be forced to marry against their will, debt or no debt. But what can I do? I have no money, nowhere to go. I'm leaving, Tucker said abruptly. Tomorrow night. I've saved enough to buy land of my own up north near the Canadian border. Good grazing land far from here. He paused, his eyes never leaving hers. You could come with me. Rose's breath caught. You would do that. For someone you barely know, Tucker's expression softened. I know enough. I know you deserve better than being sold to a man 3 times your age. I know you're brave enough to come find me tonight, knowing what it would mean if you were caught. But why would you risk it? Rose pressed. Thomas would be furious. He could come after you. Let him try, Tucker said grimly, then his voice gentled. As for why, maybe I believe in helping those who need it. Maybe I've watched you these 2 days and seen something worth fighting for. His eyes held hers. Or maybe there's something between us that deserves a chance to grow, without Harrington's shadow over it. The truth of his words resonated in Rose's heart. There was something between them, something immediate and powerful that she couldn't explain. If I go with you, she said slowly, what would you expect in return? Nothing you don't freely give, Tucker replied firmly. I'm offering you freedom, Rose. What you do with it is your choice. Rose searched his face for any sign of deception, but found only sincerity. When would we leave? How? Tomorrow night, Tucker said. After everyone's asleep, I'll have horses ready midnight and a gentle mare for you. We'll head north, staying off the main trails. I have supplies cached about a day's ride from here. You've been planning this for some time, Rose observed. Tucker nodded. My arrangement with Harrington was always temporary. I've been saving for years. He hesitated. I didn't plan on taking anyone with me, but plans change. Rose took a deep breath. The sensible part of her knew this was madness, running off with a man she barely knew rather than marrying the wealthy rancher who had, at least on paper, cleared her father's debt. But her heart knew that a life with Thomas would slowly kill her spirit. Yes, she said firmly. I'll go with you. Tucker's smile transformed his face, making him look younger and lighting his eyes with something that made Rose's heart skip. Tomorrow night then, midnight, meet me here, Rose nodded, then glanced nervously toward the house. I should get back before someone notices I'm gone. Be careful, Tucker warned, and Rose, he caught her hand as she turned to go, don't give anything away tomorrow, act normal, if Harrington suspects anything. I understand, Rose assured him, though the touch of his hand on hers sent her pulse racing. I'll be careful. Tucker released her hand reluctantly. Until tomorrow, then. Rose slipped back to the house, her mind racing with equal parts fear and exhilaration. She was actually going to do this run away with Tucker Hayes, a man she barely knew but somehow trusted with her life. It was foolish, reckless, possibly even dangerous, but it was her choice. Perhaps her first real choice in years. The next day was torturous. Rose went through the motions, helping Mrs. Cooper with wedding preparations, enduring Thomas's possessive touches and comments about their future together. Each time he mentioned their impending marriage, she had to fight to keep her expression neutral, to hide the revulsion and fear his words inspired. The minister will arrive by noon tomorrow, Thomas told her over lunch. The ceremony will be small, just us, the necessary witnesses, and a few business associates. I've ordered a special dinner to follow. It sounds lovely, Rose forced herself to say, her stomach churning. Thomas reached across the table to take her hand. After dinner, we'll retire to the master bedroom, our bedroom. I've had Mrs. Cooper prepare it specially. His thumb stroked over her knuckles in what he clearly thought was a seductive gesture. I think you'll find I can be a very attentive husband. Rose struggled to maintain her composure, to not snatch her hand away in disgust. I'm sure everything will be perfect, she managed. Throughout the day, she caught glimpses of Tucker going about his normal duties. Not once did he approach her or give any indication that anything unusual was planned for that night. His discretion both reassured and impressed her. Here was a man who understood the stakes and knew how to keep his head. As evening approached, Rose grew increasingly anxious. What if something went wrong? What if Thomas discovered their plan? What if Tucker changed his mind? Supper that night was a tense affair, at least for Rose. Thomas, in an unexpectedly good mood, talked at length about his plans for expanding the ranch, occasionally mentioning how Rose would oversee certain aspects of the household once she was his wife. I think you'll find life here very comfortable, he told her, refilling her wine glass for the 3rd time. Rose had been carefully avoiding drinking much, knowing she needed her wits about her later. Many women would envy your position. I'm sure they would, Rose replied, forcing a smile. After dinner, Thomas surprised her by producing a small velvet box. A wedding gift, he explained, opening it to reveal a gold band set with a modest diamond. It was my mother's. I thought you should have it a day early. Rose stared at the ring, momentarily speechless. This unexpected gesture of sentiment made what she was about to do seem somehow worse, even though she knew she had no choice. It's beautiful, she finally said, allowing him to slip it onto her finger. The weight of it felt like a shackle. Thomas smiled, satisfied. It suits you. Now you should rest. Tomorrow is a big day. He leaned forward and, before she could avoid it, pressed his lips to hers in a brief, possessive kiss. Sweet dreams, my dear. Rose fled to her room, fighting nausea. Once alone, she removed the ring and placed it on her dresser. She would leave it behind. She wanted nothing of Thomas Harrington's with her when she escaped. The hours crawled by as Rose waited for midnight. She packed her few belongings in her satchel, then changed into her sturdiest dress and boots. As the clock downstairs chimed 12, she took one last look around the room that had been hers for such a short time, then slipped out. The house was silent as she made her way downstairs, avoiding the steps she knew would creak. She froze when she heard a noise from Thomas's study, but after a tense moment, realized it was just the settling of the house. Heart pounding, she continued to the kitchen door and out into the night. The moon illuminated her path to the stables. Tucker was waiting, as promised, with 2 horses already saddled, his black stallion Midnight and a dappled gray mare. You came, he said, relief evident in his voice. Did you think I wouldn't? Rose asked, handing him her satchel. Tucker secured it to the mare's saddle. I hoped you would. But I would have understood if you couldn't bring yourself to leave. There's nothing for me here, Rose replied firmly. Tucker helped her mount the mare, his hands strong and sure on her waist. Her name is Willow, he told her. She's steady and sure-footed, even in the dark. Rose patted the mare's neck, grateful for the animal's calm demeanor. Thank you for doing this, Tucker. He swung up onto Midnight with practiced ease. We're not free yet. We need to get a good distance away before dawn. He glanced toward the main house. If all goes well, they won't discover you're missing until morning. They set off at a walk, keeping to the shadows until they were well away from the ranch buildings. Once they reached the boundary of Thornhill property, Tucker led them onto a narrow trail that wound into the foothills. This old hunting trail isn't used much, he explained in a low voice. It'll take us north without crossing any main roads for a good while. They rode in silence for the next hour, putting distance between themselves and the ranch. Rose found the rhythmic movement of the horse beneath her oddly comforting, and despite the tension of their escape, she felt more alive than she had in years. As they crested a rise, Tucker halted and turned to look back. Rose followed his gaze. In the distance, the lights of Thornhill Ranch were barely visible, small, flickering points in the vast darkness. Having second thoughts? Rose asked, a flutter of anxiety in her chest. Tucker shook his head. No, just saying goodbye to 5 years of my life. He turned to her, his expression softening. And hello to whatever comes next. The simple sincerity of his words touched something in Rose's heart. Whatever comes next, she echoed, surprising herself by reaching out to take his hand. Tucker's fingers closed around hers, warm and strong. For a moment they sat there, connected by that simple touch. The vast Montana night spread out around them. Then, with a gentle squeeze, Tucker released her hand. We should keep moving, he said. I want to reach the cache by morning. They continued through the night, Tucker setting a steady pace that the horses could maintain for hours. He clearly knew this country well, navigating by moonlight through terrain that would have left Rose hopelessly lost. Occasionally, he would point out landmarks or tell her about the land they were passing through. That ridge there marks the boundary of Blackfoot territory, traditionally, he explained at one point, though the treaties have pushed them further north now. You know a lot about this area, Rose observed. Tucker nodded. I've been exploring it for years, planning my route north. The land I've purchased is about 3 days' hard ride from here, unspoiled country with good water access and natural protection from the worst winter storms. It sounds wonderful, Rose said sincerely. Tucker glanced at her, a smile touching his lips. It's rough country, not many comforts. I grew up on a failing farm, Rose reminded him. I'm not afraid of hard work or simple living. His smile widened. I believe you. As the first hint of dawn lightened the eastern sky, Tucker led them to a secluded grove of trees beside a small stream. We'll rest here for a few hours, he announced, dismounting and helping Rose from her saddle. Give the horses a chance to drink and graze. Rose's legs were stiff from the hours of riding. Tucker steadied her as she stumbled slightly. Sorry, she murmured, embarrassed. It's been a while since I rode this long. You did well, Tucker assured her, his hands lingering at her waist a moment longer than necessary. Most people would be complaining by now. While Tucker tended to the horses, Rose stretched her aching muscles and splashed cold water from the stream on her face. The reality of what she had done running away with a man she barely knew rather than marrying the wealthy rancher who had effectively purchased her was beginning to sink in. Having regrets? Tucker asked, approaching with a small sack of provisions. Rose shook her head. No, just adjusting to my new reality. Tucker spread a small blanket on the ground and gestured for her to sit. Hungry, starving, Rose admitted. He produced jerky, hard biscuits and dried fruit from the sack. Not exactly a feast, but it'll keep us going. They ate in companionable silence as the day brightened around them. Despite her exhaustion, Rose found herself studying Tucker, the strong line of his jaw, the way his dark hair curled at the nape of his neck, the careful movements of his hands. There was something immensely reassuring about his quiet competence. You should try to sleep, Tucker suggested after they'd eaten. We'll stay here until midday, then push on. Rose nodded, suddenly aware of how tired she was. She lay down on the blanket, using her arm as a pillow. Tucker settled a short distance away, his back against a tree trunk, his hat pulled low over his eyes but his posture still alert. Tucker, Rose murmured, already half asleep. Thank you for giving me a choice. Just before sleep claimed her, she saw his slow smile in response. Rose woke to the sound of birds and the dappled sunlight filtering through the trees above. For a moment, she was disoriented, unsure where she was. Then the events of the previous night came rushing back, and she sat up quickly. Tucker was kneeling by the stream, filling a canteen. He glanced over at her movement. Good afternoon, he greeted her. How long did I sleep? Rose asked, pushing her tangled hair back from her face. About 4 hours, it's just past midday. Rose stretched, feeling surprisingly refreshed despite the brevity of her rest. I'm sorry. You should have woken me sooner, Tucker shook his head. You needed the sleep. Besides, it's better to travel in the afternoon and evening, less chance of being spotted. As if his words had conjured a threat, the distant sound of hoofbeats reached them. Tucker was on his feet instantly, his hand going to the pistol at his hip. Stay here, he ordered, his voice low but urgent. Keep out of sight. Rose nodded, her heart pounding as Tucker moved silently to the edge of the grove, positioning himself behind a tree where he could see out without being easily spotted. The hoofbeats grew louder, then slowed. Rose held her breath. Riders, Tucker reported, his voice barely audible. 3 of them, Harrington's men from the look of them. Fear clutched at Rose's chest. Are they coming this way? Tucker shook his head. They're on the main trail about half a mile east, heading north. He watched for another moment, then relaxed slightly. They're moving on. Probably checking the most obvious routes first. Rose released the breath she'd been holding. He knows I'm gone. Sooner than I'd hoped, Tucker admitted, returning to her side. We need to move, but carefully. Stay off the main trails entirely now. They quickly packed up their small camp, erasing all signs of their presence. Tucker helped Rose mount Willow, then swung up onto Midnight. We'll head northeast for a while, he said. There's rougher country that way harder to track through. They set off at a careful pace, Tucker leading them through increasingly rugged terrain. The beauty of the Montana wilderness surrounded them, towering pines, rocky outcroppings, and occasionally sweeping vistas of the valleys below. Under other circumstances, Rose might have found it breathtaking. Now she was too conscious of the pursuit behind them to fully appreciate it. What happens if they catch up to us? She finally asked as they picked their way down a rocky slope. Tucker glanced back at her, his expression grim. They won't. But if they do, Rose persisted. Tucker was silent for a long moment. Harrington has no legal claim on you, he finally said. You weren't his wife yet. You're a free woman who chose to leave. Will that matter to him? No, Tucker admitted, but it matters to the law, and I won't let him take you back against your will. The quiet determination in his voice sent a shiver down Rose's spine, not of fear, but of something warmer and more complicated. They traveled until dusk, pushing the horses as much as the difficult terrain would allow. When they finally stopped for the night, it was in another sheltered spot, this one nestled between two large rock formations that provided protection from both the elements and prying eyes. We should reach the cache tomorrow, Tucker told her as he unsaddled the horses. More supplies there, including proper bedrolls. I'm fine, Rose assured him, though the temperature was dropping rapidly with the setting sun. I've slept in worse conditions. Tucker glanced at her, a smile tugging at his lips. Somehow I believe that. He finished with the horses and built a small, carefully shielded fire. We can risk a fire tonight. We're far enough off any trail that the smoke shouldn't be visible. The warmth of the fire was welcome as the night grew colder. They shared another simple meal, then sat in companionable silence watching the flames. Tell me about your family, Tucker said after a while. If you don't mind. Rose sighed, poking at the fire with a stick. Not much to tell. My mother died when I was 14. After that, my father started drinking and gambling. We lost the farm bit by bit. My brothers left to find work elsewhere. By the end, it was just me and my father in a house that was falling down around us. She paused, the pain of those memories still fresh. When Thomas Harrington offered to clear his debts in exchange for me, my father didn't even hesitate. Tucker's expression darkened. I'm sorry, Rose shrugged. It's not an uncommon story out here. That doesn't make it right, Tucker replied, his voice tight with anger. No, Rose agreed softly. It doesn't. She looked up at him. What about you? Do you have family? Tucker's face softened slightly. My parents had a small ranch in Colorado. Good people worked hard. Both gone now, father in a riding accident when I was 17, mother from pneumonia 3 years later. No siblings. He stared into the fire. I worked other men's ranches for years, saving everything I could. When I had enough, I came north looking for my own land. And ended up working for Thomas Harrington instead, Rose observed. Tucker nodded. The pay was good and I learned a lot about running a large operation. Never intended to stay as long as I did, but, he shrugged, time gets away from you. Until something happens to make you take action, Rose said quietly. Tucker's eyes met hers across the fire, warm and intense. Yes. Something shifted between them in that moment, an acknowledgement of the connection that had formed so quickly yet felt so significant. Rose found herself wanting to move closer to him, to feel the reassurance of his touch. Before she could act on the impulse, Tucker stood up. You should get some sleep, he said, his voice slightly rougher than before. I'll take first watch. Rose nodded, suddenly shy. She settled as comfortably as she could near the fire, using her satchel as a pillow. Despite her exhaustion, sleep was slow to come. She was acutely aware of Tucker sitting a few feet away, his profile silhouetted against the night sky as he kept watch over her. When she finally drifted off, her dreams were a confused jumble of pursuit and escape, with Tucker always just ahead, leading her to safety. Morning dawned clear and cold. Rose woke to find Tucker already preparing a small breakfast of coffee and the last of their provisions. You didn't wake me for a watch, she accused mildly, accepting the tin cup of coffee he offered. You needed the rest more than I needed sleep, Tucker replied. Besides, I'm used to long nights on the range. They set out as soon as they'd eaten, following a barely visible game trail that wound through increasingly wild country. By midday, they had entered a dense forest of old-growth pine and spruce, the ground beneath the horses hooves soft with decades of fallen needles. Almost there, Tucker announced as they emerged from the forest into a small, secluded meadow. On the far side, a tumble of massive boulders created a natural shelter. The cache is in there. He dismounted and helped Rose down, then led her to the boulders. Between two of the largest was a narrow gap, just wide enough for a person to slip through. Inside was a small cave-like space, dry and protected from the elements. Tucker struck a match, revealing several wooden crates stacked against the far wall. Impressive, Rose remarked, looking around. How long have you been planning this? Like I said, I've been saving for years, Tucker replied, opening one of the crates. Food, ammunition, tools, bedding, everything we'll need to reach the homestead. They repacked their saddlebags with fresh provisions, then Tucker spread a map on top of one of the crates. We're here, he said, pointing to a spot in the mountains. The homestead is here, about 2 days' ride. His finger moved to another location further north. If we keep to this route, we should avoid the main trails where Harrington's men might be looking. Rose studied the map, trying to commit the route to memory. And once we reach the homestead, Tucker folded the map carefully. It's remote enough that Harrington is unlikely to find us, especially if we're careful. There's a small trading post about half a day's ride away where we can get supplies when needed. And if he does find us, Rose pressed, Tucker's expression turned serious. The land is legally mine, papers all filed and proper. He'd have no right to come onto my property uninvited. He paused. But if he does, I'll protect what's mine. The possessive note in his voice sent a thrill through Rose, though she wasn't sure if he was referring to the land or to her. Perhaps both. They stayed at the cache long enough to rest the horses and eat a proper meal, then set out again, heading north. The terrain grew increasingly rugged, but Tucker navigated it with confidence, always finding the safest path for the horses. As evening approached, they made camp in another sheltered spot, this time with the luxury of proper bedrolls and a small tent that Tucker erected for Rose. You didn't have to do that, she protested, when he indicated the tent was for her use. A lady deserves some privacy, Tucker replied simply. Rose smiled at that. I'm not sure I qualify as a lady anymore, running off with a man I barely know, sleeping rough in the wilderness. Tucker's expression softened. You're more of a lady than most women in fine dresses and grand houses. Real quality shows in character, not circumstances. The simple compliment warmed Rose more than she could express. Thank you. They settled into a routine over the next 2 days, riding from dawn until dusk, making camp in sheltered locations, taking turns standing watch through the night. Throughout it all, Tucker remained the perfect gentleman, always respectful of Rose's space and never presuming anything beyond the strange partnership they had formed. Yet Rose found herself increasingly drawn to him. She noticed the small kindnesses he showed her, always ensuring she had the most comfortable spot to rest, sharing the best portions of their meals with her, patiently teaching her the skills she would need in this new life. More than that, she noticed the way his eyes followed her, the gentleness in his touch when he helped her mount or dismount, the way his voice softened when he spoke to her. By the afternoon of the 3rd day since their escape, Rose's feelings had evolved into something she could no longer deny. She was falling in love with Tucker Hayes, with his quiet strength, his unwavering integrity, and the respect he showed her that no man, not even her father, had ever demonstrated before. We're getting close, Tucker announced as they crested a ridge. Below them, a valley spread out, bisected by a clear, rushing stream. On the far side, nestled against the protective embrace of a forested hillside, sat a small cabin. That's it, that's home. Home. The word resonated in Rose's heart. After years of uncertainty and fear, the simple log structure in the distance represented something she had almost given up hoping for: safety, stability, and perhaps, just perhaps, love. They made their way down to the valley floor, following the stream toward the cabin. As they drew closer, Rose could see that while simple, the structure was solidly built, with a stone chimney and a covered porch across the front. A small corral stood nearby, and beyond that, a meadow of lush grass stretched toward the tree line. It's beautiful, she said sincerely. Tucker's smile was filled with pride. It's not much yet, but it will be. Good water, good grazing, plenty of game in the forests. A man could build a life here. Or a family, Rose thought, though she didn't voice it. They reached the cabin as the sun was beginning to set, casting everything in a golden glow that made the humble homestead look almost enchanted. Tucker helped Rose dismount, then led the horses to the corral where a lean-to shelter offered protection from the elements. "Let me show you inside," he said when he returned, a hint of nervousness in his voice that Rose found endearing. The cabin was simple but well-crafted: one large room with a stone fireplace, a rough-hewn table with 2 chairs, a small kitchen area, and a bed built into one corner. Tucker had clearly spent time here before, as there were basic provisions stored on shelves along one wall and cooking utensils hanging near the fireplace. "I know it's not what you're used to," Tucker began, but Rose stopped him with a hand on his arm. "It's perfect," she said softly. And she meant it. After the opulence of Thornhill Ranch, which had felt like a beautiful prison, the honest simplicity of this cabin felt like freedom. Tucker built a fire while Rose explored the cabin more thoroughly. Despite its simplicity, she could see the care that had gone into its construction, the tight-fitting logs that would keep out the winter cold, the smooth plank floor, the windows positioned to catch the morning light. "You built this yourself, didn't you?" she asked, running her hand along the mantel. Tucker nodded, arranging kindling in the fireplace. "Over the last 2 years, whenever I could get away from Thornhill for a few days, Harrington thought I was just taking hunting trips." "It's amazing what you've accomplished," Rose said sincerely. Tucker struck a match and the kindling caught quickly. "It's just a beginning," he said, standing up and turning to face her. "There's so much more to do: expand the cabin, build a proper barn, break ground for crops, increase the herd." "We'll do it together," Rose said without thinking. Tucker stilled, his eyes searching hers. "Rose," he said quietly, "I need to be clear about something. I brought you here to give you freedom, not to bind you to me or this place. If when things settle, you want to move on to a town or to find your brothers or make some other life, I'll help you do that." Rose's heart swelled at his words. Even now, when he had risked everything to help her, he was still offering her choices, still refusing to assume any claim on her. "Tucker," she said, stepping closer to him, "the last few days have shown me more kindness, more respect, and more consideration than I've known in years. You gave me a choice when no one else would. You risked everything to help a woman you barely knew." She took a deep breath, gathering her courage. "I don't want to go anywhere else. I want to stay here with you if you'll have me." For a moment, Tucker didn't move, his expression a mixture of disbelief and dawning hope. Then, slowly, he reached out to take her hands in his. "Are you sure?" he asked, his voice rough with emotion. "This won't be an easy life, Rose. Hard work, harsh winters, few luxuries." "I'm sure," Rose replied firmly. "I don't need luxuries. I need honesty and kindness and—" She hesitated, then finished softly, "and love, if that's something you might feel for me someday." Tucker's hands tightened on hers. "Someday," he echoed, a smile beginning to form. "Rose, I think I started falling in love with you the moment I saw you arrive at Thornhill, looking so brave despite everything." He released one of her hands to gently touch her cheek. "These past days have only confirmed what I suspected then, that you're the strongest, most remarkable woman I've ever met." Joy bloomed in Rose's chest, warm and bright as the fire beside them. "I love you too, Tucker," she whispered. "I never thought I could feel this way so quickly, but I do." Tucker's smile was radiant now. Slowly, giving her every chance to pull away, he lowered his head until his lips met hers in a kiss that was gentle yet filled with promise. Rose responded eagerly, her arms sliding around his neck as she pressed herself closer to him. When they finally separated, both a little breathless, Tucker rested his forehead against hers. "If we're going to do this right," he murmured, "there's a preacher at the trading post. We could ride there tomorrow, make this official." Rose nodded, touched by his consideration for her reputation even here, miles from civilization. "I'd like that." They prepared a simple supper together, moving around the cabin in a dance of growing familiarity. As they ate at the rough-hewn table, they talked about their plans for the homestead, the gardens Rose wanted to plant, the herd of cattle Tucker was gradually building, the improvements they would make to the cabin over time. "We should add another room," Tucker suggested. "For?" "Well, for the future," Rose blushed, understanding his meaning. "I'd like that." After supper, Tucker insisted on sleeping by the fire, giving Rose the bed. "Just for tonight," he said with a wink that made her blush deeper. "Tomorrow we'll be properly married." Rose lay awake for a long time, listening to Tucker's steady breathing across the room, marveling at how completely her life had changed in just a few days. From the brink of a loveless marriage to a man she feared, to the threshold of a life with a man she loved, it seemed almost too miraculous to believe. Yet it was real. The rough comfort of the cabin around her, the promise of tomorrow's wedding, The honest love in Tucker's eyes, these were solid, tangible things in a world that had long seemed determined to deny her any happiness. As sleep finally claimed her, Rose's last thought was a prayer of gratitude for the courage that had led her to the stables that night, and for the man who had offered her not just escape, but a future filled with hope. Morning dawned clear and bright. Rose woke to the smell of coffee and the sound of Tucker moving quietly around the cabin. For a moment, she simply watched him, the careful competence of his movements, the gentle strength in his hands as he tended the fire, the way the morning light caught in his dark hair. "Good morning," she finally said, sitting up. Tucker turned, a smile spreading across his face that made her heart skip. "Good morning. Sleep well, better than I have in years," Rose admitted, rising and smoothing her rumpled dress. "Though I wish I had something nicer to wear for our wedding." Tucker's expression softened. "You could wear sackcloth and still be the most beautiful bride in Montana territory." He crossed to a trunk in the corner of the cabin and opened it, withdrawing a carefully wrapped package. "But as it happens, I might have a solution." Curious, Rose accepted the package and unwrapped it to find a dress simple but well made, in a soft blue that reminded her of summer skies. "Tucker, it's beautiful," she breathed. "But how?" "I picked it up at the trading post a few months back," he explained, a hint of embarrassment in his voice. "The trader's wife had ordered it from back east, but it didn't fit her right. I got it for a good price, hoping someday I might find someone to give it to." His cheeks reddened slightly. "Seems presumptuous now." "No," Rose assured him, holding the dress against herself. "It's perfect, thank you." After a quick breakfast, they set out for the trading post. The ride took most of the morning, following a winding trail through forests and meadows. The trading post itself was a cluster of rough buildings in a small clearing, the main store, a blacksmith's forge, and several small cabins, one of which, Tucker explained, belonged to the preacher who served the scattered homesteads in the region. The preacher, Reverend Miller, was a kindly older man with a snow-white beard and twinkling eyes. When Tucker explained their situation in carefully edited form, omitting the fact that Rose had been intended for another man, the Reverend readily agreed to perform the ceremony that very afternoon. "It's not often I get to unite two young people in matrimony out here," he said with a smile. "Most of my work is burying the dead and offering comfort to the living. This will be a pleasant change." Word spread quickly through the tiny settlement, and by the time the ceremony began, several of the trading post's residents had gathered to witness it. Rose, wearing the blue dress that fit her as if made for her, felt a strange mixture of nervousness and absolute certainty as she stood beside Tucker in the Reverend's small cabin. The ceremony was simple and brief, but no less meaningful for that. When Reverend Miller pronounced them husband and wife, and Tucker kissed her with gentle reverence before the assembled witnesses, Rose felt a happiness so complete it brought tears to her eyes. The trader's wife, a motherly woman named Mrs. Perkins, insisted on hosting a small celebration in their honor. There was cake, a rare luxury on the frontier, and coffee laced with whiskey for toasting the newlyweds. For a few precious hours, Rose and Tucker were at the center of a community's warmth and good wishes, a fitting start to their life together. As dusk approached, they said their goodbyes and began the journey back to their homestead, their home now, truly shared. They rode side by side, occasionally exchanging glances that spoke volumes about the night to come. When they reached the cabin, Tucker insisted on carrying Rose across the threshold, a gesture that made her laugh with delight. Inside, he had prepared a surprise before they left that morning: wildflowers in a tin cup on the table, fresh bedding on the bed, and a bottle of good whiskey he'd been saving for a special occasion. "Welcome home, Mrs. Hayes," he said softly, setting her down but keeping his arms around her. Rose looked up at him, her heart so full it might burst. "I loved the sound of that." Later, as they lay tangled together in the bed that was now truly theirs, Rose marveled at how completely her life had transformed in the span of a week. From property to be sold to beloved wife, from captive to free woman, from despair to joy beyond measure. "What are you thinking?" Tucker murmured, pressing a kiss to her bare shoulder. "That I'm the luckiest woman in the Montana territory," Rose replied honestly. Tucker pulled her closer. And I'm the luckiest man. I rode to Thornhill that day expecting nothing more than another month's work. Instead, I found the woman I want to spend the rest of my life with. How long do you think it will take Thomas to give up looking for us? Rose asked, a shadow of anxiety crossing her mind. Not long, Tucker assured her. Men like Harrington don't waste time on lost causes. He'll find another young woman to intimidate, or he'll hire a new foreman to replace me. Either way, he'll move on. He brushed a strand of hair from her face. And so will we. As the years passed, Tucker's prediction proved true. They never saw Thomas Harrington again, nor any of his men. Perhaps he had indeed moved on, or perhaps he had never bothered to search this far north. Either way, Rose and Tucker were left in peace to build their life together. The homestead flourished under their combined efforts. Tucker's skill with horses and cattle, paired with Rose's knowledge of crops and gardens, made for a prosperous, if modest, ranch. The cabin expanded first with the additional room they had discussed that first night, then with a proper kitchen, and finally with a covered porch that wrapped around two sides where they could sit in the evenings and watch the sunset over their land. Children came first: a son they named James, after Tucker's father, then twin daughters, Sarah and Emily. The children grew strong and capable in the clean mountain air, learning the ways of the land from their parents, developing the same quiet competence that characterized both Rose and Tucker. Once a month, they made the journey to the trading post, which over time grew into a proper small town with a school and a church. Rose became known for her preserves and medicines made from wild plants, which she traded for fabric, books, and other necessities. Tucker's reputation as a horse breeder spread, bringing buyers from as far away as Missoula and Helena. On their 10th anniversary, Tucker surprised Rose with a gift: a proper gold wedding band to replace the simple silver one they had purchased at the trading post on their wedding day. You deserve better than what I could afford back then, he told her as he slipped it onto her finger. Rose looked up at him, love filling her heart just as it had that first night in the cabin. I have everything I could ever want, she replied truthfully. You, our children, this home we've built together. I wouldn't trade it for all the gold in Montana. 20 years after their escape from Thornhill Ranch, when their children were grown or nearly so, a visitor arrived at their homestead, a young man who introduced himself as David Cooper, Mrs. Cooper's grandson. My grandmother passed last winter, he explained as they sat around the kitchen table. Before she died, she made me promise to find you if I ever traveled north, to let you know that Thomas Harrington died 5 years ago. She thought you might want to know you're truly free now. Rose and Tucker exchanged a glance, a lifetime of understanding passing between them. We've been free since the day we left, Tucker said simply. But thank your grandmother for her kindness. She was a good woman in a difficult position. After David left, Rose and Tucker stood on their porch, watching the sunset as they had countless times before. Tucker's hair was now streaked with silver, and lines of laughter marked the corners of Rose's eyes, but the love between them had only deepened with time. No regrets. Tucker asked softly, his arm around her waist. Rose leaned her head against his shoulder. Not one, she replied. Every difficulty, every hard winter, every struggle was worth it for the life we've built. She looked up at him, her heart still skipping a beat at his slow smile, even after all these years. I'd run away with you all over again, Tucker Hayes. And I'd still be waiting in those stables to steal you away, he returned, bending to kiss her with the same gentle reverence he had shown on their wedding day. As darkness fell over the Montana mountains, Rose thought of the frightened young woman she had once been, and the desperate gamble she had taken with a man she barely knew. Sometimes the greatest risks brought the greatest rewards. She had risked everything on Tucker Hayes, and in return, she had gained a lifetime of love, respect, and happiness beyond anything she could have imagined on that fateful night when she'd been sold to a rancher twice her age, and the cowboy had interrupted with those life-changing words. She's leaving with me.